He's brought to us, by the way, with the generous help of both the City of Corvallis and the Office of Academic Affairs at Oregon State University, and we do appreciate their help in bringing Congressman Lewis to us. Our board host for today is Mr. Alan Oliver, who will ask the first question. Alan is the chair of our program committee, a member of the Board of Governors, and president of Home Accents. In the way of a commercial message, he was also featured in Northwest Magazine a couple of weeks ago. We love to have stars on the board of directors of the City Club. The questions, because of the form of the room, we will have two microphones for those. Oh, sorry, I lied. We will have one microphone. It has nothing to do with the shape of the room, I guess. It will be in the center of the room. I would hope that you will ask oral questions. We give priority to those of you brave enough to stand up and ask those. If you are shy, there are forms on your table for asking a written question. And of course, my usual reminder of all City Club members that a question ends in a question mark. Our speaker today comes to us from Atlanta, Georgia. He also comes as someone who literally grew up in the civil rights battles, if you will, that went on in the South. He is somebody who is going to help us understand, I think, the legacy of those battles of the 60s, and also to help us understand where those battles have led us to today. What gains have African Americans and other minorities made in the past 25 years? And how far do minorities still have to go in becoming an integral part of our society and gaining political equality? Congressman John Lewis was only 21 years old when he joined the 1961 Freedom Riders, and he was its youngest member, and he participated in any number of the different major civil rights activities in the South at a very early age. He was a chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee for 3 years and worked very vigorously on a number of voter registration projects, and he was one of the leaders of the Selma marchers. In 1986, John Lewis decided that it was time to try and make changes from inside Congress. He had served as an Atlanta City Councilman, and he ran against Julian Bond, and in a very hard-fought race was elected to Congress in 1986. He was re-elected in 1988 and serves on the Interior and Insular Affairs Committees and Public Works and Transportation Committee and the Select Committee on Aging in the United States Congress. Presenting a speech entitled "The Civil Rights Legacy, Foundation for a Changing Nation," will you help me welcome Congressman John Lewis?
Thank you very much, Bill, for that wonderful introduction. Let me just say that I'm delighted and very happy and very pleased to be here at the City Club of Portland. It is good to be in Portland. It is good to be in this great state. It's beautiful here. I could live here. But don't tell the people in Georgia I said that. I'm happy to be here to see several friends of mine. Jim Draper, who I've known over the years, who left the South and found new grounds here in this great state. I can see by looking at the mountains and the rivers how you can be so tempted. It's good to see a good friend of this city, a young man that I worked with over the years, a political scientist, a foundation executive now, Dr. Charles Rooks. So I have friends in this state, so don't be surprised one day when I may look this way. But I may have to get a passport or maybe a visa from one of my colleagues in the Congress. Bill didn't tell you that I grew up in rural Alabama. I may represent the people in Georgia, in a big city like Atlanta, the home of Coca-Cola, the home of Delta Airline. I won't mention that other company that left Portland, but I come from the rural South, the heart of Alabama. In 1944, when I was 4 years old, my father had saved $300, and with the $300, he bought 110 acres of land. And on that farm, we raised corn, cotton, peanuts, hogs, cows, and a lot of chickens. It was my responsibility to care for the chickens. Now, my staff wouldn't like for me to tell the story about caring for the chickens, but some of you knew or know by now, when I was campaigning for Congress in Atlanta, I told the story over and over again, and it got me elected. And since we had chicken for lunch, I'm going to tell you the chicken story. It was my duty, my responsibility to care for those chickens. I fell in love with raising chickens. Now, most of you in this great state, in this great city, members of this prestigious city club, would know anything about raising chickens, setting hens. I had to mark the fresh eggs and put them under the hen and wait for 3 weeks for the eggs to hatch. And from time to time, I would take the little chicks from one hen and give them to another hen. I put them in a box with a lantern and raise the chickens. I was never able to save $18.95 to get an incubator, so I had to cheat on these hens from time to time. I fell so in love with raising these chickens until when one would pass away or die, we had a chicken funeral. My younger brothers and sisters and my first cousins would be the mourners, and I would preach, deliver the eulogy. On one occasion, I tried to baptize one, and it just didn't work. I think my first nonviolent protest in rural Alabama was protesting against my mother and father when they tried to sell one of the chickens or kill one of the chickens or trade one of the chickens. But that was life growing up in rural Alabama during the 40s, during the 50s. But I will never forget in 1955, when I was 15 years old, in the 10th grade, I heard of a man by the name of Martin Luther King, Jr. As a child in rural Alabama, I had tasted the bitter fruit of racism. I had seen those signs that said colored waiting, white waiting, those signs that said colored men, white men, colored women, white women. I saw signs in the little department store, the little variety store, in corners that said white drinking, colored drinking. A sign at a shining, clean water fountain marked white only. Another corner of the store, a spigot marked colored only. As I watched the unfolding drama in Montgomery in 1955 and in 1956, just 50 miles from where I grew up, the concept of nonviolent confrontation with the forces of segregation brought a ray of hope to me, as it did for many people throughout this nation. I saw Martin Luther King Jr. as a product of the South, a man who had received a very good education. I saw him as a young minister who was trying to make his religion relevant to the needs of his people, and I admired that. In my mind, Martin Luther King Jr. was a modern-day Moses using organized religion and emotionalism within the black church as an instrument, as a tool for freedom. In 1958, at the age of 18, after I spent a year in Nashville in school, I wrote Martin Luther King Jr. a letter and told him of my desire to attend Troy State College, better known today as Troy State University, an all-white college about 8 miles from our home. Dr. King wrote me back and invited me to come to Montgomery. And he sent me a round-trip Greyhound bus ticket. And I traveled from Troy to Montgomery to meet with Dr. King and the Reverend Ralph Abernathy in the pastor study of the First Baptist Church in Montgomery. And this was the beginning of a long and beautiful relationship. After that, our path was to cross often. In the sit-ins in 1960, during the Freedom Rides in 1961, as a board member of his organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in 1962, in organizing the 1963 March on Washington, in Mississippi during the Mississippi Summer Project in 1964, in the March from Selma in 1965, at the Riverside Church in New York City when he spoke out against the war in Vietnam, and in preparation for his ultimate quest, the Poor People's Campaign for 1968. As I grew to know Martin Luther King Jr. in the efforts of the movement, my admiration for this man also grew. He was a spokesperson not only for blacks, but for human beings everywhere. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke to the hearts and conscience of all of us who believe that nonviolence and love offer a more excellent way. This good man, this God-fearing man, gave us hope in a time of hopelessness. This man, this patriot, this son of America, produced light in dark places. Martin Luther King Jr. had the ability to bring the dirt, the filth from under the American rug, out of the cracks and the corners into the open light in order for us to deal with it. And I said to you, members of the City Club of Portland, that Martin Luther King Jr., more than any other American of the 20th century, had the power to bring more people together to do good. Black and white, red and brown, Protestant, Catholic, and Jews, young and old, rich and poor. Martin Luther King Jr.'s message was love. His weapon was truth. His method was creative nonviolence. His goal was the beloved community, a community of justice, a community at peace with itself. And I must say to you today that I'm not talking about something that I read about in the New York Times or the Washington Post, or something that I saw on NBC or CBS, ABC, and during those years we didn't have CNN. But I must tell you that this man that I marched with, this man that I worked with and went to jail with, this man that I got to know was so sensitive and so caring. He was a beautiful human being, so black and at the same time so American. He personified the very best of humankind. He could speak, and the masses understood from his words that they were somebody. He was a gentleman who used the teachings of the great teacher and the tools of Gandhi. In a sense, he spoke a strange language, the philosophy of passive resistance to evil and the use of nonviolence in the struggle for good. I can hear Martin Luther King Jr. as he spoke in 1955 in Montgomery with a mighty voice when he said, "You who protest courageously and yet with dignity and love, when the history books are written in future generation, the historian will have to pause and say, that lives of great people, of people who injected new meaning and dignity into the very veins of our civilization." In 1990, and as we move toward the 21st century, we must rededicate ourselves to the struggle that was his struggle and continue to seek the goals which were his goals. Martin Luther King Jr. taught us to believe in the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence. He taught us to accept nonviolence not simple as a technique or as a tactic. When you accept nonviolence as a tactic or as a technique, it becomes like a faucet. You can turn it on and you can turn it off. He taught us to accept nonviolence as a way of life, as a way of living. And in the southern parts of the United States of America, for the most part, our struggle during the past 30, 35 years have been a nonviolent one. I believe that we must continue to live and work with the creative philosophy of nonviolence. Dr. King would say today that if we are to emerge from our struggle unscarred by hate, we must learn to understand and forgive those who have been most hostile and violent toward us. As I traveled and worked throughout the South during the 60s, I have seen civil rights workers and indigenous people whom we were trying to help with their heads cracked open by nightsticks, lying in the streets, weeping from tear gas, calling helplessly for medical aid. I've seen old women and young children involved in peaceful, nonviolent protests, run down by policemen on horses, beaten back by fire hoses, and chased by police dogs. Yet these people were still able to forgive, understand, and saying, "Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around." Those of us that came through the period of the 60s, who believed the nonviolent method to be effective, those of us who happen to believe that nonviolence to be a more creative way, are saying in effect that the struggle in which we are involved is not a struggle between people. It is a struggle between the forces of division and the forces of reconciliation. It is a struggle between the forces of hate and the forces of love. Dr. King would tell us that means and ends are inseparable. We're struggling to create the beloved community, to create an open society. This is our goal. This is our end. Then our methods, our means must be consistent with the goal we seek. Now, some people today would say that the philosophy of nonviolence is old-fashioned, that it's out of date, that it's obsolete. But the nonviolent movement of the 60s was like a bridge over troubled waters. The philosophy, the discipline of nonviolence is still very relevant today. If it hadn't been for Martin Luther King Jr., I'm not so sure will we be witnessing hundreds and thousands of people in Eastern Europe singing "We Shall Overcome," even on the Berlin Wall. If Martin Luther King Jr. could speak to us today, he would tell us that our government first concern should be meeting basic human needs, that we should get out about the business of providing food, shelter, health care, education, jobs, and livable income for all of our citizens. He would tell us that we must continue to work to make his dream become a living reality. Sometime in Washington, some of my colleagues in the Congress said to me, "John Lewis, aren't you bitter? Aren't you hostile? You were arrested more than 40 times. You were beaten and left lying in the streets unconscious in Montgomery in 1961. You had a concussion in Selma in 1965. Don't you have some hate toward George Wallace, the Klan, and Sheriff Clark, and others?" And I said no, because our responsibility, our task, was to redeem the soul of America, to create the beloved community, to create an interracial democracy. 25 years ago in the South, there were only about 1 million black registered voters in 11 southern states, from Virginia to Texas. Today, there are more than 7 million. 25 years ago, there were less than 50 black elected officials in 11 southern states. Today, there are more than 6,000. I can remember 25 years ago on yesterday, but it was my responsibility to lead a march of more than 600 elderly black men and women to the Dallas County Courthouse in Selma, Alabama, to attempt to register to vote. And a sheriff by the name of Jim Clark, big man, who wore a gun on one side, nightstick on the other side, and had an electric car prodder. He walked up to me and said, "John Lewis, you're an outside agitator. And an agitator is the lowest form of humanity." I looked at the sheriff, spoke, and said, "Sheriff, I may be an agitator, but I'm not an outsider. I grew up 90 miles from here, and we're going to stay here until these people are allowed to register and vote." He said, "You're under arrest." And took me to jail, along with a few other people. And a few weeks later, we decided to march from Selma to Montgomery, to dramatize to the nation and to the world that black people in Alabama, in Mississippi, and other parts of the South wanted to participate in the democratic process. It was on Sunday, March 7, 1965, when we lined up in twos and start walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, across the Alabama River. Governor George Wallace had issued an order the day before saying that this march would not be allowed. Sheriff Clark had requested that all white men over the age of 21 to come down to the Dallas County Courthouse to be deputized to become part of his posse. We were determined to march from Selma to Montgomery. When we got to the apex of the bridge on that beautiful Sunday afternoon, we saw a sea of blue. Alabama state troopers. We kept walking and got within hearing distance of the line of state troopers. A man identified himself and said, "I am Major John Cloud. I give you 3 minutes to disperse and go back to your church." In less than a minute and a half, Major Cloud said, "Troopers, advance." They put on their gas masks. They came toward us, beating us, tramping us with horses. Some of us were hurt. But when the American people in this state, in this city, around this nation and around the world, saw what happened in Selma on that bridge, there was a sense of righteous indignation. The President of the United States, Lyndon Johnson, went before a joint session of the Congress and called for a strong Voting Rights Act. The night when he spoke, he said, "I speak tonight for the dignity of man and for the destiny of democracy." Lyndon Johnson went on to say, "So it was at Appomattox, so it was at Lexington and Concord, so it was last week in Selma, Alabama." And in that speech that evening, he said, "We shall overcome on several occasions." And I was with Martin Luther King Jr. that evening as we watched Lyndon Johnson, and Dr. King began to shed a few tears. He knew then that the Voting Rights Act would be passed. Because of the Voting Rights Act of 65, the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Fair Housing Act of 1968, because of the goodwill of hundreds, thousands, and millions of American citizens, because of the nonviolent movement under the leadership of Martin Luther King Jr., we have witnessed in this country what I like to call a nonviolent revolution, a revolution of values, a revolution of ideas. I think we're a better country, we're a better people. We've come a distance, but we still have a great distance to go before we create that beloved community. The 8 years of the Reagan administration were bad years for minorities, for women, almost for everybody. If you have a government, you have an administration, a president, a Supreme Court, a Congress that says it's all right not to enforce civil rights laws, it's all right not to believe in affirmative action, then the private sector, the business community is not going to take the lead or take the initiative. The government must create the climate, create the environment for change. Finally, as we move toward the 21st century, we must find a way to inject the ethics, morality, discipline, and commitment of the early civil rights movement into the body politics. We must find and support a new breed of candidate for public office, men and women of vision, politicians with the moral capacity of a Martin Luther King Jr. We must support courageous leaders, men and women, who will redirect the priorities and the tremendous resources of this nation, not to oppress, but to uplift. Not to divide, but to bring together. Not to enslave, but to set free. We need leaders at the national level who would give Americans a sense of purpose, a sense of direction, provide the country with a vision of the future. We must use our talents, our resources, our minds, and our votes to look out for all humankind. By working and building together with our brothers and our sisters, black and white, brown and red, young and old, rich and poor. I'm confident that one day we will build in this land of ours the beloved community and interracial democracy. Thank you very much.
We've come to the question portion of our program. We will have a microphone in the center of the room, as I mentioned earlier. For those of you that do want to do a written question, there are forms on your tables. Please hold them up after you've written your questions so the staff can find you and bring them forward. As usual, we will give priority to those of you brave enough to stand up and ask an oral question. Our first question today comes from our board host, Alan Oliver. Alan?
Congressman Lewis, thank you for the inspiring speech. You alluded briefly at the beginning of your talk to a company that left Portland and went to Atlanta. And I would be interested in your evaluation of how Georgia Pacific has been behaving as a citizen of the state and of your city. And beyond that, the larger question of what do you think is the role of the business community in working toward the goal of establishing the beloved community and interracial democracy in America?
Georgia Pacific is a good, very good corporate citizen. The company is located in the heart of my congressional district, and we have very good, have a very good working relationship. I think the business community must continue to be out there, to take the lead, to take the initiative. It's in the self-interest of all of us that we have a society of peace and a society of tranquility. In many of our large cities, there are just too many people that have been left out and left behind. In my own city of Atlanta, I see it in Washington, D.C., you see it in New York, I'm not sure about Portland, but there are too many young men, minority men, growing up without any sense of purpose, without any sense of direction. And I think the business community could play a role in getting the local government, state government, and the federal government in making more resources available for training people, rescuing people. We don't need an underclass in America.
Congressman Lewis, welcome back to Portland. My name's Chris Pierce. You mentioned the forces of division, and I would like to let you know that there are forces of division working in Portland today as we speak. There is an initiative to change the name of Martin Luther King Boulevard back to its original name, and I was wondering, it's proving to be very divisive. There will be a vote in May, apparently, and I was wondering if there was a message that you would like to leave the business community and the city of Portland as we face this vote.
It would be my hope that the forces of goodwill would prevail. I think people must look upon Martin Luther King Jr. not as a black man, a black leader, a black hero. He was an American patriot, an American hero. He must be looked upon as one of the founding fathers of the new America. Because in a real sense, he helped to free and liberate all of us, blacks and whites. All across this country, people are naming buildings, streets, roads after Martin Luther King Jr. And I think it's fitting and appropriate for people, the citizens, to have a choice in naming streets and roads and buildings in honor of a man of peace.
Congressman, I'm Helen Lee, a member of the club. You said that government's first concern is meeting the basic needs of its people. The revised Welfare Act that goes into effect in October, I believe, is going to cost more money in the short run to provide the training and other services for the welfare people. Is Congress going to appropriate enough money to help us get that job done?
Well, you know, I cannot make any commitment about the 434 other members of the House and those 100 strange guys and gals on the other side over there in the Senate. But I would think that the Congress would make the necessary resources available. I just cannot make any, I don't have any assurance, but it's my belief that we would make those resources available. If we can get some of those so-called peace dividends, we may have the bring some of the boys home and the women, the men and the women home, stop spending so much money on bombs and missiles and guns. With peace breaking out all over Eastern Europe, we should have some money left over for some of these programs.
Congressman Lewis, Bill Long, I'd like to ask you a question about your experiences in the 60s, and a more personal question, if I may, and that is if you'd feel comfortable to speak to us about some of the inner resources that you developed during the period of the civil rights struggle. That is, on what did you draw during that period, and were there any times during the broad period from 55 to 70 in which you felt it wasn't worth it anymore? So perhaps if you could deal with the issue of your own resources that you appeal to and that question.
Thank you very much for the question. More than anything else, I saw my involvement in the civil rights movement as part of my religious obligation or religious conviction. I think my religious faith and commitment had a great deal to do with it. Some people would say that the civil rights movement in the South was a religious phenomenon, really. I think what kept me going was my belief in the rightness of the cause. When I participated in a sit-in, on a freedom ride, or during the marches, I felt like I was involved in something like a holy crusade, that it was the right thing to do. I never will forget when I first got arrested the first time. In February 1960, I was 20 years old. My mother wrote me a letter. I was off in school in Nashville, Tennessee. She's down in rural Alabama. She heard I was in jail. You know, you're not supposed to go to jail. It's bad. It's, you know, it's bad on the family name and everything. So it was embarrassing, I guess, for the family. But I felt good. I felt very proud, really. I lost the fear of jail. And you come to that point where you lose the fear of being beaten. You come to that point even in Selma and Montgomery. You don't want to be arrested. You don't want to go to jail. You don't want to be beaten. You don't want to die. You want to live. But you come to that point where you lose the fear of dying. And part of, I think, what kept me going, I kept my eyes on the prize, really. I used to tell some of my colleagues in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and in the movement that we should pace ourselves, that the struggle is not one that lasts just for one day, or 1 week, or a few months, or a few years, but it's a struggle of a lifetime.
Congressman, when one speaks to young whites, 20, 30 years old, and you ask about the black agenda, they'll say, well, the blacks are people who believe that they should be given things that others have to work for. And as I look back over the last 25 years, and I recall the message of Stokely Carmichael, he said that what blacks needed was cultural and political unity, an international view, and self-help. He rejected the idea that the solution lay in an alliance with progressive whites. He said that wasn't enough. And as you look over the last 25 years, do you sometimes think that that Brother Stokely was right?
No, I don't think Brother Stokely was right. If I thought Brother Stokely was right, I wouldn't be standing here as a member of the United States Congress. I believe in, throughout my involvement, I preached the whole idea of coalition politics, the idea of building the beloved community, and interracial democracy. When I won the primary in the runoff in 1986, I won with 44% of the black vote and more than 80% of the white vote. Part of my whole life, adult life really, have been one of trying to create that sense of community. And I think the voters in Atlanta recognize that. I was running, as some of you may well know, against a person that was better known, had more money, and most of the black leadership supported him because they thought he was going to win. But today, and I probably shouldn't say this here, but it may sound a little arrogant for a politician, but I think I have a pretty safe seat.
Congressman, I'm Jim Zern, member of the City Club. As you may or may not know, this club is now embarked on a year-long study of what we call ethnic minority issues in this city. We're looking at the status of racial relations in the Portland area. One of the things that some of us are hearing that are participating in the study, and we're hearing this both from members of the minority communities and also from the majority white community, is that there's a sort of a cycle that inhibits full participation of minorities in the public and private community. And the cycle, we're told, runs something like this, that members, but for a relative handful of relatively well-educated and economically fairly well-set members of the minority community, most members of the minority communities are just too busy, too tired, trying to make a living, trying to put bread on the table and have a place to live and keep their lives together, to play any kind of role in community groups, be they public, private, citizen participation process, etc. And that there then are two consequences from that. One is that the minority members themselves of the community do not become integrated in any meaningful way, do not have the opportunities, develop the skills, etc., by participation in the community. And then secondly, that the institutions themselves, be they public, private, non-sector, do not get the input that they would have and therefore make allocation of resource decisions in a way that's not as beneficial as it might be. So then there's a sort of a cycle about all this, because then when the resources don't get allocated, the people are still trying to make a living. And do you agree with that as an assessment of a significant problem in this coming together? And if you do, what do we all do to try to break this cycle?
I think that is less, and maybe that was true some time ago, but I think in most major urban centers in America, there are minorities, and not just black American, but others with the time can afford the luxury of participation, participating with civic organizations and groups. But I think the majority community must seek out, must go out, find people, recruit people, bring people in, and open up. But I don't think we should hide behind that people are too busy, that people don't have the time, they're just trying to make. I know in my own city, of Atlanta, and it must be true in Portland and other major urban centers, there are a cadre, growing number of young black and other professionals with the time, with the ability to be involved, and you should go all out like it's a mission, really. That shouldn't be an excuse.
Slightly different topic here. You're a member of the Select Committee on Aging. Do you have any comment on the recent Moynihan initiative to lower Social Security taxes?
Well, I think I'd like to see them lowered, but I have not had an opportunity to study the proposal. When I get back to Washington on Tuesday, I'm going to take a look at it and probably make some type of commitment. Got out of that one.
Congressman Lewis, my name is Ray Polani, and I couldn't help noticing that you are a member of the Public Works and Transportation Committee. And I am, I guess, the resident transportation guru here. And I can't help thinking, in the context of what you said today, about Rose Parks and how it started with the desegregation of the bus service in Montgomery, Alabama. It seems that in the last few years, public transportation and buses and rail has all been forgotten. Serving on the Transportation Committee, do you see that we are going perhaps to balance better our transportation in the near future before we're forced to do it?
We must, and I think we will, in the days and years to come as we move into this decade. I think where we will spend money, a lot of money, not millions, but billions of dollars, would be to rebuild our transportation system, our infrastructure. I think we got to spend more money on our rail system, passenger service across this country. We have in Georgia, I guess it's this sort of eastern seaboard, there's only one passenger train, Amtrak train, and it's full, sold, oversold, overbooked, every single trip. I want to see not just rapid transit in our cities, but I want to see in the state of Georgia, linking small towns and urban centers. I prefer traveling by train than by car. I won't talk about the airplanes since Delta is located in the district, but I think a lot of people would prefer seeing rail service, and I think that's where we're going to spend money, and we must spend money on rebuilding our rail passenger system.
Thank you. No political contribution was made prior to that.
Charlie Davis, member of the club. I'm concerned as I see the war on drugs deliver more and more casualties of young black men, either by way of the morgue or by way of an expanded prison system, which seems to be the mentality of government at every level at this point. Is there any possibility that the present policy at every level of government to suppress the use of drugs will ever be successful, and what does that tell us about the prospects for young black men?
I wish I could really respond in a very positive way. I must tell you that I'm not hopeful and not optimistic that the present policy of this administration and of the drug czar, Mr. Bennett, will work. I don't think it's working. We look at the nation capital, look at Washington, D.C., the number of people that have been killed so far this year, I believe about 30, maybe more, and most of them are drug-related. And Washington, D.C. was supposed to be used as the model. I think we got to spend resources on more on treatment educating people, starting with the children, the very, very young, to stop so many people from being hooked and turning to drugs, really. The future's not very bright, but I think the American people must rise up and say to those of us in Congress and to people in this administration that we must find a way, come up with a blueprint, with a roadmap for dealing with this problem. In my own district, I have more than 55,000 people living in public housing. And one of the things that I've been trying to do during the past few months as congressperson and as a citizen of Atlanta and just as a human being, I've gone out and spent the night in several of those housing projects to dramatize the need for greater police protection, the need for the law enforcement people to get the drug pushers out of those housing projects, that these people have a right to live in safety without fear.
Doug McCourt with the City Club. It's a question on the method of creative nonviolence. Do you have any words of encouragement for the growing number of people that are involved in the battle to protect the natural environment as it relates to their efforts? And do you see methods such as spiking trees? I don't know if you know anything about that.
Spiking trees?
One method that's been used to stop logging in certain areas, predominantly with the protection of what we refer to as ancient forests, has been to put spikes, either of ceramic or metal, into trees so that when the saws go through, they break. And I guess a question on that line is that consistent with creative nonviolence? Or when can it be? And how? What do you tell the people that are engaged in that, given the fact that I suppose that would be necessary for any democracy, certainly in a racial democracy, a natural environment that's maintained?
Well, I believe that we must protect, save, and preserve the environment, and do what we can to save this planet. It's very small and it's fragile. It's a little planet, spaceship Earth. And we don't have a right really to waste it, to rape it. But we should use what we need and save and preserve for future and unborn generation. And what I would say to individuals here in this state, around the nation, back in Georgia, that are concerned about protecting and saving the environment, saving the tree. We need to save the forest. More green space, more open space. That be creative. I don't have the blueprint or the map, but use the philosophy, use the techniques of nonviolence. It may not be a sit-in, it may not be a spike, it may be something else, but there's so many ingredients under the umbrella of nonviolence that you can use. And I think people have to be creative.
Jane Cummins, City Club member, and thank you for your inspiring comments. First of all, we read in the Oregonian, our local newspaper, a couple of days ago that the life expectancy of black men in Harlem is about the same as Bangladesh. It's a stain on our character as a country that should be. What comments would you like to make about health care priorities and spending priorities?
Well, I believe this is our last question. Health care is a major concern of a growing number of the members of the Congress. In our country, more than 37 million of our citizens are without any form of health care, any form of health insurance. A country is so rich and with so many resources. It is a disgrace, it is a shame that people in Harlem in the rural South, other urban centers cannot get proper health care. I think the Congress must come up with a national comprehensive health care system. The United States of America and I believe South Africa are the only two major so-called democracies, right, without a health care system. We shouldn't be in the same boat with South Africa. And we can do better, and we must do better. I believe when people are not receiving proper health care, their human rights are being violated. People have a right to decent health care. That's where we should be spending our resources. Thank you.
I want to thank Congressman Lewis for a very inspirational talk, and come back to Oregon anytime. I'm sure we can get that visa should you decide to do it permanently. And please come back next week to hear the debate over Portland State University or the University of Oregon at Portland. We'll be at the Benson. We are adjourned.